So welcome back, everyone. This is the final session of the conference, and Sarah is here to cover the topic of ProLinkHFA checklist. And we ended up having two coffee and bagel winners today. The first one was Marcus McQuaid at Oregon Housing. And the second winner was Karen Cole at New York State. So congratulations, Marcus and Karen. And we really appreciated having you at this year's conference in all the sessions as well as during the break. So I hope you have learned something new today and yesterday, and hopefully had a chance to meet some new people and catch up with folks during coffee and bagel. I'm going to run down the housekeeping items just one last time, so please bear with me for the next couple of minutes before we hand it off to Sarah. So first, on the right side of your screen, you have access to the chat feature. This particular session is a live session. And while the speaker, Sarah, is focusing on presentation, we have Kelly Encinias, who's a customer adoption manager. You saw her last session. She will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. So please feel free to post any questions or comments throughout the session in the chat, and Kelly will be responding to you in real time. Or Sarah will follow up with you after the session. So please note that your posts and comments are visible to all other attendees. Also on the right side of your screen, you have access to the poll feature. So throughout the session, 3 poll questions will be displayed one by one. So when you provide your response each time, you'll be able to see the poll result in real time. So we encourage you to participate. And this is where you can download a copy of Sarah's PowerPoint. You can download anytime before, during, or after her session. So now, without further ado, I'll introduce the session speaker, Sarah Supranan, for one last time. She's a customer success manager at ProLink Solutions. She's been with us for 12 years, and I'm sure many of you have interacted with Sarah over the years. She addresses client-submitted tickets and questions by working with the product team for resolutions. She also provides clients with the latest enhancements and updates on all ProLink products. She'll be covering the topic of ProLinkHFA checklist today. So Sarah, you can share your screen now, and please take it away.
You have disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
There you go. Sorry. Give it a shot.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what I believe is our last session of the day and of the conference. Today, I'm going to review checklist and ProLinkHFA with you. This might be something that your agency currently uses in your day-to-day processes, and if not, this will show you how you can use them. And hopefully we'll all learn something a little new today. I'll be going back and forth between our PowerPoint and showing you some things live in the system. So our agenda is to go through the basics of checklists, how to add them manually, how to create a template, how to use them for data views, and then how you can use them in the workflows, which I feel like Kelly might have covered some of that in workflow. So it might be a little redundant, but we'll go through that anyway. And this is what we're going to learn about checklists in our first agenda item, and where you can put them, how to complete them, and how to find help. So as some of you may or may not know, I'm going to put this over there. You can use checklists on a property, a dev deal, a grant. If there are specific things that you have employees in your agency that need to do on a yearly basis, before you onboard something, before you finish underwriting, you can create checklists for basically anything you need. You know, it's usually I keep a checklist on a notebook or a Post-it note. This is obviously much fancier, and there's more accountability and more tracking for auditing to find out what has been completed and what hasn't, and how you can look through and report and find out what's done and what isn't. Most of our objects and modules in ProLinkHFA you can add checklists to. And then all checklists, you can add checklist items. So when you first go in to create a checklist, if you're familiar with ProLink at all, you know that we have our basic screen layout. We know what our required fields are because we have our title, or the red asterisk, that's the title that always tells you that's the only thing that is required when you create a checklist. And once you create it, the history is going to populate the created date. That's why that's a read-only field. The sort order is important primarily for Smart Docs. So if you decide you want to map Smart Docs items or send them, that's going to be the order that they are sequenced. And you might remember sequencing from our previous Smart Docs session. Otherwise, it might also show how it displays on the screen in the order that it displays on the screen. You want to have it active, otherwise you're not going to see it anywhere, or be able to utilize it correctly. And then you'll have your checklist description, which is whatever you want to enter for that description. So once you have created your checklist and you want to create, if you're creating it manually, not via template, you'll go ahead and want to add your checklist items. Now, a lot of what we're going to go through is also going to be repeated when we do checklist templates. So I'm going to focus on how to create checklist items now, so we can kind of breeze through it when we do get to templates. So the title of your checklist item is going to be a descriptive name for your checklist item. You have specific things that you need to do. You know, in this particular example, I have budget auditing and reporting requirements. Was the operating budget prepared and submitted? You know, things like that. So your agency employees can go in and check them off as they're done. So the receive date, that's going to be the date you kind of created the checklist. And that's when whoever's responsible for the checklist is aware the checklist exists. Like, this is the day we created it. The completed date will be something that whoever is completing the checklist will enter when they've completed that particular item on the checklist. Now, we have a config setting in admin that we can set for you. So when you click into the completed date, it will automatically populate it with today's date. But if you turn that config setting off, the completed date will have to be manually entered. And it's basically just agency preference. That's a functionality we had delivered for another client years ago. And some people like it and some people don't. So the waive date, if it's not required, and you'll show that if a checklist item is required over here on the right, it'll be yes or no. And you can have workflows send out email reminders if there are required checklists that haven't been populated. If they're not required and they're nice to have, you don't have to worry about whether or not the agency employee fills that out or not. If for a required item, you can waive it. So if it's not completed, you would expect that it would be waived. Now, when you manually create your checklist, you can enter the due date manually here. Is required with sort order. Again, that is something that allows these to be displayed. And if you're mapping, then in Smart Docs, those would be sequenced. Because if you want to, manually add a checklist that you've already created and have like a checklist template for a particular property, you can just zip that up that way. And then you can put in your description for your description field. So, I just went forward. So let's kind of go through this real quick. I'm going to bring up a live example in our system. So we'll go on over here to this particular property. And I already have several checklists on here that I created for this demo. But just to create a new one, I'm not going to worry about the sort order. And I'm just going to enter that. So once you save it, like a lot of records, then you'll have the additional option to add your checklist item. So when you go to add your checklist item, you just click over here above the grid. And that's when you can enter your information manually. and you have to enter your due date manually. And templates will allow you to set that up and calculate the due date, but we'll get there. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because while this is going to show you how to create all this stuff manually, you're probably going to want to use templates. So we have checklist item 1, and we can say, okay, well, today we received that item. It's not completed and it's due on December 1st. So creating a checklist manually, you must manually populate the due date. And these are things that they just come up. You've already, added a checklist template, and it's like, oh, we need to do this, like for unforeseen circumstances like COVID, for example. If there are steps or procedures that you need to take care of that are COVID related, you could create a COVID coverage checklist of some kind for your specific record that you need that for. So again, like all of our fields, this will kind of cover everything that you need to know when you look at the PowerPoint after our training, if you do need to refer to that. So for the checklist to show up as complete as a status, all required items have to have a completed date or a waived date. Otherwise, it's going to show incomplete when you look at the checklists. Dates can be entered by clicking into the item or entering the date on the checklist items grid, which let's go back. And again, I know I mentioned this before, but we can show you how we can do it. So, okay, look, I completed this today. And because we have this config setting set to true, it's going to automatically populate the completed date with today's date when I click into it, and then I can save it. And when I go over to the list checklist, this particular checklist is going to show as completed because I just completed the one checklist item. So as you can see, this one is complete because the total of required items are complete. This one is incomplete because that item is not completed. So that's how the status is. You can read the statuses on the list checklist page, so you know what's done and what's not done. And I believe these can also be, the status can be pulled back in data views, which we'll get there. So again, with help, you're familiar with help. If you need to go out and look at help for the checklist or templates or anything like that, navigate to help, and you'll be able to review some of the things that we looked at here, or you can always download the PowerPoint and put that in your cheat sheet training folder to refer to if you need to. So what we have learned here, checklists are a series of items which track tasks and milestones. You can populate the dates. You can complete a checklist item by entering a completed date or waived date, and you know how to get help. And we kind of already went through creating checklists manually. What did I do here? Yeah, same thing, creating manually. We just did that. I apologize for this being repetitive here. Again, go anywhere to checklist, list checklists, and add a new one. We're going to get to the new from template. In fact, I think I'm going to kind of speed this up to get there because we've already kind of gone through this. Sort order not required, or I just breeze through it like I want to do because I'm just so excited to give you all this information. This goes through the step-by-step instructions, which again, I kind of showed you in the live system. And this reminds you that save will save the changes, save and return is going to take you back to the edit checklist screen when you add the checklist item, or save and new will save changes and open a new item. If you are familiar with ProLink, you know how save and return, save and new works. If you're new to ProLink and you have to go in and add, data like 4 or 5 records in a row, you'll find that save and new may be one of your new best friends. So we already kind of went through creating a checklist manually. Again, I feel like once we go through templates, creating them manually is going to be something that you try to avoid doing, especially if you do have yearly tasks that every property or every dev deal needs to go through at a specific time. And that way you can just add it from template and it's taken care of. If you need to update a template, you can. But again, I'm getting ahead. See, we're here. I'm very excited about checklist templates. We'll show you where to find the checklist template section in the admin menu. Again, since it is in the admin menu, that's one of the areas where you need specific privileges and able to get in there and create the checklist templates. If creating checklist templates is under your job description, you might want to talk to your sysadmin about making sure you have privs if you don't. We'll go through how to create the template, which is very similar to creating the checklist manually. It's basically the same steps. There are just a few little nuances that are different. And then we'll show you how to add a checklist template to an object, which I think Kelly mentioned previously. Consider an object the screen or the particular record or property or deal that you're working on. So when we say object, that's what we're talking about. So when you create a checklist template, you will be able to add that template to any object within that accepts them, like TC, grants, dev, property, loans. This way you can have standardized checklists for your common and repeatable tasks. Again, saving time, not requiring you to create checklists from scratch because we're all busy and we don't have time for that silliness. And you can select those at the admin panel right here. And as I said before, you need to have an admin permission in order to access and create checklist templates from the admin panel. So once you do go into checklist templates in admin, you'll be directed to the template screen, and it's going to list all your checklist templates. Now I'm going to go through the entire PowerPoint before I go back in the system, because that's where I get us lost and out in the trees and everything. So if you have checklist templates in your system, you'll see them here. It will tell you if they're active, if they're not active. If you have, let's say that you have like an REO checklist that you've used for a few years and you need to make a new one for 2021, you can inactivate that one and just create a new one and update it with a year, whatever makes it easy for you to keep track of which are the most recent or which are the previous ones were used. It's important to note, we're going to cover this later, if you have a checklist template that you have deployed across the system on properties or dev deals or whatnot, when you update a template that is already tied to another record, the template on that record will not get updated. It will just be for properties that add that updated template going forward. They're not retroactive. They don't go back and change anything. So you will just go to checklist templates, select new. And again, we have our required fields here, same as edit checklist, you'll notice. Title, sort order is active, description. And you don't have to put a sort order if you don't want to, of course. And then you can put in as much description as you need for the point of having that checklist. After you enter it, you'll hit save. After saving, you will see the screen. We'll have add checklist item on here. Here's the fields. Now, this is where it differs from entering a checklist manually. When you enter a template, this will be the days until due. Now, how it calculates your days until due is based on when you add that template to your record. And we'll kind of go over and show you what that's going to look like. Because if I add this template with this particular checklist item to a property today, that's going to be due on the 17th. It's going to automatically populate based on the system date. 7 days from the day we added that template to that object is when it's going to be due. And that's just, I'm sure 7 days is not a very long time. And I'm sure that yours would have at least 30 days or something to that effect. And I did make a note on here that changes to checklist template items only apply to new ones. So here we have like kind of the steps for onboarding, step 1, step 2, step 3, etc. This one's not required. And this order can just kind of, if you want to keep your steps in the order they're supposed to be doing it, that would help you with that. But again, it comes down to updating things via Smart Docs. So once we've created that checklist as a template and we want to add it to another object, we can go into a selected property, a selected deal, etc. Click on checklist. So again, it reminds you here that after you create the template and make it active, at that point you can add it. If it's not active, You're not going to be able to select it from the modal that we're about to show. And that's helpful if you have an outdated checklist and you don't want anybody to use it anymore. You know, if you want it for historical purposes and you don't want to delete it, you could just mark it as an active. And going forward, people will not be able to select that from the available templates that they need to add. And if you want to inactivate a checklist item, you can inactivate the checklist item and that item will not be available in the template. So that just allows you to kind of edit and finesse your checklist from time to time if you need to do that. So again, after clicking, you'll be directed to the list checklist screen to create a checklist from a template. You will click new from template, and creates probably not the best word. When we click new from template, we can add the template that we had created. Once you bring up the add checklist template, a modal is going to come up that's going to show you all the active checklist templates that are in your system when they were created. Then you can select one or more to add to your particular object. Then click add selected and close. And then you're going to see it created based on the items that you had added during our create from template item. So now we're going to go in and actually look at this in action. So we're going to go down here to admin, and then we're going to select checklist templates. And these are all the ones that we currently have in the system, just for testing purposes. I'm going to make one inactive just so we can verify. All right, so this underwriting checklist copy should not be available when we actually get to a property to add it. So just remember that underwriting checklist copy shouldn't be there because it's inactive. And these are all the ones that we have in our system, like an annual review checklist for small properties. Someone's gone in here and created this, and it has all these different items and how many days until due. So if I add this particular checklist to a property, it's going to magically calculate how many days after today is 120 days and populate the due date with that value. And so any of the ones that are active will be able to add. You can also, if you have like your annual review checklist, and it's like, you know what, I kind of want to I want to copy this one. You can copy everything that's on the checklist with all the requirements. And then if you want to delete a few things or make them inactive, you can do that. Just say that, you know, there's some things on here we don't need anymore. So this is going to supersede our previous template. Let's say that we want to make this for 2022. Those are all the changes you had to make. That's going to make your life easier going forward. And let's say we're going to make this inactive now so people don't inadvertently select it. So when we go to our object to add the template, we're not going to see that one, but we will see the one that says 2022. So for everyone playing at home, annual review checklist and copy will not be available to select in the add checklist template modal. Hold on, that's a lot of words. I need some water here. Okay, so now we're going to go over here to a property. As you might have noticed, I kind of like properties the best. They're my favorite. And I'm going to go into, let me go into another one because I'm not sure what I have in this one. Via search. So this particular property already has 2 checklists on it. And as you can see, this one I've made an active since, but it's not going to change the historical data on the record. We're going to add a couple of new ones just so you can see how the due date functionality does work. So when I click new from template, this is going to pop up and we're going to see all of the available checklists that are out there. So we see asset management checklist for 2022. I don't see the copy of the underwriting checklist. So that's good. That does work as expected. And the sort order for your templates will dictate how these display in your modal. So this is one that we just created. That was the copy that we created. And then we can just pick another one just for fun. This is the one I created just now. We'll add both of those. Now let's add 3. So I click add, and we've added the 3 new checklists down here. You can see that it will show you how many items are required and how many are incomplete. So on our annual review checklist, recall that we did have several items that were going to be due in 120 days. And that's why we filled in that due date. So now everybody knows 120 days from now is March 10th, 2022. If it's not required, it's not going to populate a due date in there because there's no need since it's not required and it's optional. But then it's going to show up here. Receive date. I didn't populate the receive date. I'm going to go back real quick. Hang on a second. Let's do this. And Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong, but why am I under the impression that receive date should have been populated when I added it to the property? I'm going to look into that. Otherwise, you'll have to do this, and nobody wants to do that. I don't want to slow us down because it doesn't take much to get me to go down a completely separate rabbit hole on these things. So depending on what checklist you want to do, if it's part of your onboarding process, when you enter a property in the system, let's say you have 5 different areas that need tasks to be completed, you can go create those templates and then go in and add them manually to the property. So as the property continues down its happy path, those checklist items can be completed and updated with a completed date. All right, so checklist templates. If you have any questions about this, just let Kelly know, let me know. You can standardize your tasks. You can modify checklists. You can't modify the names or required when you actually go into a checklist template after you've added it. Updates to checklist templates will only apply to checklists created going forward. So give me just a second. I'll show you kind of what this means, that you can't modify checklists created, but you can't modify the names. Apologies. Let's go back in here real quick. Oops. So for this particular checklist, these are things that we added. If I want to go in here and edit something, that may have been what I did manually. Let me make sure I'm going to the right one. No, that's right. I know. It will tell you. It's not going to disable it, but if you try to edit any other information, it's going to let you know that it's not happy about it. So I'm going to cancel out of there. Just kind of wanted to show you what you can and can't do when you actually have an item from a template. So now let's talk about how we can use checklists in our reporting with data view. We'll show you the data views that reference the checklist information and how to filter to find out ones that need attention. If you were part of our data views discussion yesterday, I kind of went through advanced filters, things like that, and we set up some data to kind of show you kind of a use case on what you could do to view some of these checklist items. So in our data view panel, you'll be able to find the objects that do have checklist and checklist items. Some will contain 2, some will just have checklists for whatever reason. When you go to that data view, it's going to give you the basic information about your checklist at the default level. For your default view, it's just going to the name, the status. It can pull in your property name. It's going to tell you how many items, how many required, how many have been completed. So you can kind of look out there and say, oh, so-and-so hasn't finished their items. Checklist items does get a little bit more granular with the checklist name and the checklist item name, which portfolio property or object that it is associated to. So let's go in and look at some live action shots of the data views. To nobody's surprise, I'm going straight to properties. And with checklists, it's going to show you all the checklists in the system. and the properties that are associated via the default view. If you want to create your own view, this is going to, I'm going to change the number of rows displayed real quick, just so we can get a look at some more data. So just kind of, eyeballing this, you can see some are complete, some are incomplete. So I'm going to go in and create a new view that's just going to show me complete items. Well, let's do incomplete. So this is, right now we have 92 records. We know that some of them are incomplete, some of them are complete. So we're just going to go to checklist status. If I can now zip through. So now when I go and select that view that has filtered out the complete items, we have 92 records. We should go down to a little bit less than that. We'll definitely see the number change. Okay, so in our entire system, we only have 4 tasks completed. So we're obviously slacking on our portfolio property checklist. So that's a way for you to filter just based on checklist, what needs to be completed. You can group by property, again, something we learned in data views yesterday, to see which checklists are not completed. Then when you get into checklist items, you have a few more options. Here's your default view. And I have grouped those by, oh, I have done a filter on my property name that gives us that particular properties checklist item information. In View Manager, I have set up something that you could use repeatedly if you just want a high-level look at what items are due in 7 days. If you're the person that's responsible to get out the cattle prod for someone who hasn't completed items, you have to chase them around with it. This way you can just look at a data view and send it, do an export, send it to them, say you need to finish these. Or again, we can use workflows to generate emails to them and say, hey, these are due. Have you taken care of this yet and just neglected to update your checklist? But the way I created this filter was the completed date is empty and the due date is days after today, which is 7. So when I go back and select the due in 7 days data view, it's going to show me all the items that are due in 7 days. And I set up data yesterday, so it would come back and show you which property, which items are going to be due, and who the assigned asset manager is. So I guess in the real world, I would be sending Kelly emails saying, are you going to do this? Have you done this? Do you need me to do this? Et cetera, et cetera. However you handle it in your neck of the woods is what you would do. Like I said, if it's 7 days away, I can set up a workflow, send an email out to remind her as well. So again, that's how we can use to report on overdue items. You could probably put, we also, oh, let me go back and do this because we did this today and I don't know if that gentleman is on the phone. I don't think that one's going to work. Okay. So let's say we have multiple checklist items that you want to check. You have a couple of situations that you want to see 2 different kinds. Let me go into View Manager and look how I set up this. So I have 2 criteria in here. It's going to bring back one, it's going to bring back both if it's this scenario or this scenario. So if you have a checklist item name for applications for LITEX and it's not completed, it's going to bring back those checklist items. And then if you have checklist item name contains budget auditing and it's due after today, it's going to be an either or if you need to track more than one checklist item for whatever reason in a data view. So I can kind of group them by the checklist item, like, okay, that one's completed, these are completed, etc. So there's different ways you can use advanced filters to get the results that you want through your data views. All right, so now we're going to do a brief overview of using workflows with checklists and how to add a checklist to an object and how the workflow can be triggered with checklist items and triggered by checklists. So any workflow that you set up is going to have like a checklist template here. If you want to add a checklist to every new property that's created, that is how you can like automatically get a checklist template added to an object. So every time somebody creates a property, this workflow will make sure that that particular template is added directly to the property. You don't have to manually go out and do it. This is something that when we first implemented for the one client, they had every time they advanced a stage, the template would populate for that particular stage so that they could keep up with what needed to be tracked for each stage, which is something that you can do, like if you have a dev deal or a TC deal, like when a TC deal advances to 8609 app feasibility stage, you can have a checklist template attached when it gets that field gets set at the TC deal level. So that checklist is going to magically appear on that particular TC deal if you need it to. And there's some little nuances here. I would highly recommend, if this is something that you're interested in doing in your agency, that you take advantage of your UAT environment, and which I know a lot of you already do. I'm thinking of Becky and Deidre and Elena, that we sometimes have to fight with our workflows to make sure that we have the criteria set up correctly and find out why it's not generating. So test it and make sure it works in UAT before you decide to, unleash it upon the world in production. And I think most everybody tends to do that, but it's also going to give you familiarity with exactly what workflows and checklists are capable of doing together. So you can set up to evaluate individual checklist items. Like for this example, if you want to notify an asset manager when it's approaching its due date, you can create the criteria like this. Usually it's completed date is empty. And this particular criteria isn't checklist item specific. It's just basically any checklist item in the system that fits this particular criteria. You can generate a workflow to an asset manager for that. Now, if you have very targeted items that you need to do, like I can't remember specifically, and I'm thinking of one that I worked on recently, CNA something. And if I could hear her and she was on the call, I know she would tell me exactly what it is. But I could do like checklist item name contains, and then you can, or equal to the description of the checklist item. At that point, the workflow would just go through and look at that particular checklist item and then the due date criteria, et cetera, with that. So there's a lot of different ways you can make this work for you if you want to do a whole checklist, or if you do just want to do some checklist items. Oh, here we go. See checklist title, deal intake steps. This way you can let, at the checklist level instead of the checklist item level, create a workflow to completed data is modified and it's not empty, title equals this. It will generate a workflow based on the checklist title. And then especially if that checklist is incomplete, this will alert underwriting perhaps, or that it is complete or it's not complete, or an asset manager, you need to finish some things. So I think I put those jobs backwards right there. So that's kind of it for checklists and workflows. You can use them with checklists. You can attach the checklist. Even if you attach a checklist manually and you still want to use workflow to validate what has been completed and what hasn't been completed, you can still, workflow is just going to look at the object on, or the checklist on the object of the property, and anything that meets that criteria, whether it was added via template or it was added manually, it's going to generate the information based on what is currently in the system. Excuse me. So if you have any questions, and you can email me, hopefully if you had any questions, Kelly has answered those questions for you. If not, again, email myself. Leslie put in a Zendesk ticket. If you want to spend some time going over this or want us to take a look at something that you have set up that's not working and you don't know what it is working, we either find out why it's not or try to figure out if there's a problem. And as always, we'll be happy to help you in whatever way we can to make your life easier with using ProLinkHFA. So thank you again for joining us. And Here's hoping you all have a non-virtual happy hour after this like we do. See you next year. And this is where Ryan comes and saves me, so I have to stop talking like a silly person.
Let me share my screen.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, man. I ran out of words, which never happens.
That's okay. 1 second, everyone. So, well, thank you everyone for joining the session and joining the conference. I hope this conference was helpful to you in learning about not only ProLink software products, but also gaining some industry knowledge and getting some timely updates on what's latest in our industry. So we made some effort this year to bring in some relevant speakers from outside. So as a reminder, copy of Sarah's PowerPoint is available here. Also, you can come back and watch the recording of the session anytime. And since conference is over, but you're still able to log back onto the platform for next 90 days to watch any of the session recordings. The session survey is available on the right side of your screen, so please provide any feedback you might have on this particular session. And you'll be also receiving an email tomorrow from us that has a link to the survey for the entire conference. So there will be a separate opportunity where you can give us your feedback on the entire conference experience. So please be on the lookout for the email and provide your honest feedback so we can continue improving. So this is a final session of the conference and we're done. So we really appreciated having you at this year's conference in all the sessions, as well as during the break. I personally enjoy seeing some of you at Coffee and Bagel and listened on some interesting conversations between the attendees. So obviously that doesn't fully replicate the in-person conference experience, but it was our attempt to make up for what's typically lacking in virtual conference experience, where you might feel it's just one-way street and you don't get to interact too much. In addition to annual conferences, we provide quarterly trainings and other webinars. So please be on the lookout for future announcements. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter, which you can do on this conference platform homepage. And thanks to all of you for attending again, and also special thanks to all the speakers at ProLink Solutions, as well as guest speakers from outside. So this is it. Please follow us on social media. The hashtag is here, ProLinkTechLive21. Please leave any comments. And please take care and reach out to us with any questions or feedback. And thanks again. Goodbye.